This is Denmark, famous for the world's oldest flag, their really old monarchy, the Vikings. It's also one of the happiest nations, home to the inventors of Skype and Lego. Denmark is located in Europe. It borders with Germany and has a population of 5.5 million. The country became a unified nation around 700 AD, but people were happily settled there since the end of the Ice Age. And these two people were thrown into a bog many thousands of years ago, and they've been preserved ever since. So this is present-day Denmark, but we need to go way back to 100 AD, where at the time there are a few tribes hanging around. The Angles, the Jutes, the Saxons, and the Danes. But then most people decided to migrate to Britain, so the Danes moved into Jutland and finally occupied the entire realm of present-day Denmark, as well as some parts of present-day northern Germany. Okay, so let's go to the Viking Age. First of all, the biggest misconception about the Vikings: they didn't have any horned hats, and yes, they raided and pillaged places, but they actually did a lot of farming, and were into settling and trading. Compared with other people at the time, they were also quite clean. They had their own language and a pagan religion, with gods like Thor and Odin. That was until King Harald Bluetooth introduced Christianity, although some guy mentioned it before, but nobody listened to him. Generally speaking, the Norwegians expanded to the north and west to places like Ireland, Scotland, Iceland, Greenland and Newfoundland, also known as Vineland. The Danes went to Western Europe and Southern Europe, settling in Danelaw and Normandy, and the Swedes went east. They were able to sail the seas and rivers effectively, thanks to their immense longships. They managed to sack Paris, under the leadership of Ragnar, with 120 ships and 5,000 soldiers. After besieging the city, Charles the Bold then paid them a huge amount of money to leave. And a while before that, the Vikings first raided England, sacking and looting a monastery in the north. And having raided many times, they gained a reputation, and soon found it easier to trade and demand money. But in 865, the Danes landed with a large army in East Anglia, with the intention of conquering the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms: Northumbria, East Anglia, Sussex, Essex, Mercia, Kent and Wessex. The armies of various Danish leaders had come together to form one combined force, the Great Heathen Army, under the leadership of the sons of Ragnar. After making peace with the local East Anglian king, the Great Heathen Army moved north, where they captured the city of York and Northumbria, and installed a puppet king called Egbert. They carried on into Mercia, but the king of Mercia then negotiated peace, so they left them alone for a while, and they continued their invasion by defeating King Edmund of East Anglia and conquering East Anglia. The king of Wessex, Ethelred, and his brother Alfred then attempted to stop them by attacking the Danes at Reading, but they were repelled. However, Ethelred and Alfred managed to defeat them at the Battle of Ashdown. The Viking army then decided to go back to Mercia, and they took part of Mercia. Alfred was then king of Wessex, and he paid the Danes money, or Danegeld, to keep them away for a while. And a guy named Guthrum became leader of the Viking army, and after a few years of peace, Alfred managed to defeat the Danes at the Battle of Edington, after spending some time with a peasant and burning some cakes. Alfred and Guthrum then decided to divide England into two. Guthrum converted to Christianity and established Danelaw, and kept Northumbria under puppet rule. Over the years, the Danes were driven out of England by Alfred's sons, and Viking rule ended when Eric Bloodaxe was driven out of Northumbria, and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were restored. After many raids along the coast of France and the Netherlands, one group of Danes was granted permission to settle northwestern France, under the condition that they defend the area from future attacks. As a result, the region became known as Normandy, and it was the descendants of these settlers who would conquer England in 1066. The Danish monarchy goes way back, starting with Gorm the Old, and there were a few other possible kings, but they're legendary, so Gorm was the first historically recognised. A little while later, Sven Forkbeard ruled Denmark, and over in England, King Ethelred the Unready massacred a number of Danes, including Sven's sister. Sven then launched attacks on England and conquered it, becoming king, but he died a few months later after falling off a horse. So his son Cnut then took power, and the empire was stable throughout his rule. But in 1042, Edward the Confessor became king of England. The Danes were never kings of England again, and sadly the Danish Viking kings never managed to turn their conquests into a lasting empire. Danish fleets attacked Estonia, but they could never control the area. It was only when Valdemar the Victorious landed in Estonia and defeated the Estonians in a great battle, upon which Estonia came under Danish control. And legend has it this is when the Danish flag fell from the sky. He also gained some land in present-day Germany, However, he was captured and released on the condition that he surrender all of his conquests, except for an island called Rügen and Estonia. But the territories were sold anyway when the country fell into debt. However, eventually the kingdoms of Denmark, Sweden and Norway had a threesome, and they united in what was known as Kalmar Union, and its capital was Copenhagen. Sweden could never decide if she wanted to be in the Union, and one of the many great events in this period was the Stockholm Bloodbath, where there was a successful invasion on Sweden by Danish forces under the command of King Christian II, and around 80 to 90 people were executed. And eventually Sweden left. Denmark also fell into a civil war at this time because some people wanted to be Catholics, while others wanted to be Protestants. During the 16 and 1700s, Denmark had many colonies in Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands. They began to establish trading posts, a small town in India, West Africa. However, they lost land in the Second Northern War against Sweden. They also colonized two islands in the Caribbean called St. Thomas and St. John. The Danish East Indian Trading Company also colonized some islands near them, but there were many wars in this period, most of them against Sweden. There was the 7 Years' War, the Second Northern War, the Great Northern War, the 30 Years' War. Now over in France, they've just had a revolution and Napoleon takes power and starts causing havoc in Europe. During the war, the British Navy decided to stop France from importing war materials, so they searched the vessels from neutral countries. Denmark and Sweden didn't like this very much, so they formed an armed neutrality. Later on, Russia and Prussia also joined in too. Britain then got mad and threw some crumpets on the floor and attacked the Danish fleet in Copenhagen, and they destroyed part of it. A few years later, the French fleet was destroyed at Trafalgar. The British then feared that the French might seize the Danish fleet and use it against them. So in their panic and paranoia, they attacked Copenhagen again, bombarded the city, and Copenhagen was forced to surrender, and the British took the Danish fleet. That's a little bit harsh. Then best friends Norway and Denmark broke up, and Denmark began to sell its possessions. Its 5 trading posts in West Africa went to Britain. The Danish West Indies of St. Thomas and St. John were sold to the United States for a very low amount of money, and became the US Virgin Islands. Iceland also became independent. However, Greenland and the Faroe Islands are still with the Danish kingdom, and they love each other very much. Joined with Denmark were 2 duchies, Holstein and Schleswig. I'm probably pronouncing these wrong. I know I've pronounced a lot of other things wrong. Anyway, there were a few issues in these regions, and war broke out. Prussian and Austrian forces crossed into the duchies. The Danes fought bravely against them, but they lost, and the duchies were occupied. It's the 21st century, and war's coming. But Denmark decided to remain neutral in World War I. Smart. But then Denmark got a phone call from Nazi Germany, and they signed a 10-year non-aggression pact. But Germany invaded the next year anyway. 7,000 Jewish Danes were then smuggled into Sweden. Greenland was held by the United States, so Denmark could later regain control after the war was over. So when Germany surrendered in 1945, Danish occupation ended, and Greenland was given back to Denmark. Today, Denmark is a prosperous nation,